Theatr Clwyd is a 10,000 square metre theatre that was built in the mid-1970s in North Wales.
We're about 10 miles from the border of England, about 15 minutes from Chester, 40 minutes from Liverpool, and it's a huge building.
It was originally designed as a theatre on one side and the TV studio on the other side. And in the 90s it all became one building.
There was a condition survey done in 2010, and at that point the report said the building was nearing, if not had reached, its end of life in certain places. Mainly the engineering of the building, that was the main thing. The electrics, the air handling, most of it wasn't working, and as anybody in theatre knows, we're also quite technical buildings. We try to achieve a lot with the things that we do in our auditorium. We just weren't able to achieve a lot of those. The environment wasn't great. It wasn't great to spend time in.
You have to be thinking about this right from the start. You can't just expect to deal with it later through bolt-ons, because you're never going to get a truly sustainable building.
I think with post-war buildings, although we think of the mid to late 70s as fairly recent, it's kind of my age-ish, actually it's a different world. It was built before insulation, before Part L of the building regulations required buildings to conserve energy, and it was built out of brick block construction that leaks an enormous amount of heat into the sky, so the client's energy bills were astronomical. So really the main challenge for retrofitting a building like this is, how do you make it more airtight? How do you make it conserve more energy?
It was very important to retain as much of the existing building as possible and not extend the building any more than was necessary, both in terms of an environmental point of view, but also cost and planning. So a huge amount of work was put in the early stages, working with the clients and the community and the end users on how we can share spaces as much as possible.
A lot of the work has been around how do we insulate the walls, because replacing all the glazing is a fairly simple operation. The best thing to do was to insulate the walls on the inside face, and also we did a lot of work on how to mitigate the risks of thermal bridging or condensation around that. And where we can, we're using timber structure. And so the foyer design has been really interesting, hasn't it? Sort of using a completely timber frame and CLT floors. The main change of that is to take out the old sort of very, almost sort of primitive, you could use that word, curtain walling system, which leaked a lot of heat in the winter and overheated in the summer. And rather than compromising, actually the new foyer design takes into account things like solar shading and ventilation, and makes a sort of a foyer that's fit for now, and takes sort of the weather into account.
The building is likely to reduce energy use by 62%.
A really important step was to be able to sufficiently insulate the external walls such that we were able to take away the gas boilers and replace it with air source heat pumps.
For lighting and ventilation, we've tried to take a passive approach as much as possible, which we've been able to do for a lot of the building.
That's enabled us to make the building fossil fuel free. I think that will enable the building to be more future-proofed for the next generation.
You really can't separate out sustainability as a separate discipline and expect it to lead to good results. I think there's three primary considerations that we had. So the first was trying to make sure that the building was maintainable and could be looked after by the people on site. I mean, that's a key thing. People get quite frustrated if they find that they're left with a building that they find too complicated to use. The second consideration was making sure that it was comfortable for people within the space. And the third was really preparing the building for a more sustainable future. The problem is that those three can sometimes conflict with each other. If you have a building that is really easy to use, it's quite hard to control where the energy gets used in the space. And if you impose too many controls, then people get frustrated, because although you're using energy very efficiently, they don't really understand how to adapt it, how to make it work for them in the future, and just how to keep it running on a smooth, straight and narrow path going forwards.
Theatr Clwyd is far more than a theatre, it's a community building. It serves a huge area of North Wales. The community are very engaged. They have been throughout the process.
I think all building projects ought to think about what's important, and buildings, as you know, bricks and mortar, are only useful if they are inhabited by people, and the ownership is kind of embedded. So right at the beginning, even before our feasibility study that we did with you, we asked our communities what they wanted. Really simple questions at that stage. What one thing about the theatre would you put in a treasure chest? What one thing would you throw in a dustbin? And what one wish for the future of the theatre do you have? We sent the survey out at 4:30 on a Friday, and by 5:30 we'd had 782 responses, and over the 2-week period had 4,500. And that essentially gave us all of the platform we needed for the design principles and to make the case to funders. And we've regularly gone back to them. I mean, I think, honestly, I'm not sure enough capital projects really, truly ask people what they want and embed that into their design. I think what's been really interesting throughout this process, and it is since 2016, it's about the founding principles, the design principles of the scheme. And I think that will always be our benchmark about when we're looking at a decision. Yes, finances of course are important, they're tight, but what's the principle we're trying to achieve, and does a decision counteract that, or does it enhance that? And I think that's probably what we'll go back to, yeah.